So much, I'll close the doors after I introduce you. Thank you guys so much for coming today. I know the weather has been problematic for a lot of different reasons today, but welcome to the winter semester Humanitas Talk. The Humanitas lectures are sponsored by the Department of Literature, Philosophy, and the Arts, and the goal of this kind of recurring lecture series is to expose fellow faculty, but also, students and the whole campus community to the research that's being done by our faculty, both, permanent faculty as well as our wonderful Leo lecturers. And Jeffrey Grupp is giving our talk today, and he comes to us from Kalamazoo College and the University of Indiana.
Western Michigan.
Oh, Western Michigan, I'm sorry. Western Michigan.
And Purdue.
Western Michigan and Purdue. And he's also taught at University of Indiana, right, prior to becoming
and
Purdue. Prior to becoming a lecturer here, he's been here for 2 years with us teaching in philosophy in our department, and his research is on atomism, simulation theory, and pre-classical Indian Buddhism, which seems to be a really interesting combination of both ancient and, super modern. So he's also working on a book currently called Simulation Theory, and I think this talk today is going to give us a little taste of what Jeffrey's been working on. So welcome, and again, I encourage you to not only sign in on the sign-in sheet, but also stay for questions, because we have a small group. I think we can probably get a really good discussion. And also there's, some cookies and refreshments afterwards for you guys as well. So I'm just going to close the doors in the back.
Alrighty, good. Thanks everybody for coming. Small group. I thought it'd be a small group for such a topic like this. My computer might have been destroyed this morning with lightning, so I pieced together, I had some copies of this saved over the last few months on my computer up in my office, so I pieced it together here this morning. It's not usually the case that I can talk on all my research, everything, so this is a good opportunity to do that. I've never been able to do that. My research basically is in 2 stages. 1999 to 2007, I worked on what you can call non-realism. Let me check here. That's probably a good term to give it. And then since then, that's 99 to 05, and then simulation theory I've worked on from 07 to the present. And I haven't done that in a while. Now most of my research is completely original. Now that doesn't mean it's special in some way compared to research that's less original. It just means that rather than publishing on something that is an existing piece of work or existing theory, I instead try to invent completely new fields of research. Now that's not by design or anything, that's just is because what I'm most interested in is, since it's a small group, I can probably do stuff like this and move things around and stuff. It's just how my research has gone. Just happened to be that way. So the stuff I was interested in was required the invention of completely new fields of research there. So now what I'll do is first talk about a main argument for simulation theory, which I think two of you have seen already, and then I'll talk about my past research, which led up to simulation theory, and then I'll talk about some of the other arguments for simulation theory. We won't have time to get to all of it, because there's quite a bit of evidence, more than you might guess. So on that note, one more thing I should say is my research is basically completely dwelling in the rudiments of philosophy. What is mind? Is there a God? If so, what is it? Does a self exist? Is there anything that exists outside of consciousness and so forth? It just is a sort of coincidence, I suppose, of my research that's where what I do is focused. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's just where my research has been. So let's get into a first argument for simulation theory, and because I know that's probably what everyone wants to hear. And then I'll go over some of my past research, which is what led to this. And then I will cover more arguments for simulation theory, like I said. So this first argument here, this is an old version of it from a few months ago. which will be just fine because it got a little more technical through the month. So it's probably good to go through the earlier version of it. This is what I call the mind screen argument for simulation theory. And it's very, very simple. And let's just go through the steps. Now, this is the way, for those of you who don't know, this is the way philosophers do research. We don't have empirical observations that scientists have. We don't have historical records like historians have. We don't have equations and numbers like mathematicians have. So our tool is the concept of argument, which is based on the idea of inference, where pieces of data lead to a specific conclusion. Okay, that's been very successful in the past. People such as Einstein have used the technique, the tool of argument, in order to make dramatic discoveries. So that's what I hope to do someday with simulation theory. I'm just giving you my research where it is at the moment. This is something I work on every day, usually at night, and I have been for many years, and it's just, you're just going to get a snapshot of where it is at the moment. It'll be probably very different than a year or three from now. So the first premise here is very, very simple. It's so we have, I think, 7 data points, and then we'll come to 6 data points, then we'll come to a conclusion, which will lead to simulation theory. And I guarantee you that some of the information that you hear, well, okay, let's just get through it, and then I've got a surprise for you. First premise here, very simple. It just says that your consciousness involves picture imagery. Okay, that should be self-evidently true, and I don't know of anybody who could pose really any objection to this. There is an objection to it, I'll give it to you later. But that is the first data point. So notice that we start off completely simple with hardly any room for objection. So that means if we can stay at this simplistic level without venturing into anything controversial and tangential and which has evidence problems to it, that means that our inference to our conclusion here will be very strong. Okay, so we're starting out very simple. Your consciousness contains picture imagery such as the imagery you're experiencing your reality through right now. Okay, you have a mind, what's called a mind screen. That's just a term I've gotten in the habit of using through the years. Inside your consciousness is a cinematic sort of imagistic portrayal of reality. Okay, a 3D cinematic mind screen. All right. Data point 2: if consciousness is a physical process, which is what I believe almost every academic in the world wants us to believe right now, fine. Then, if that's the case, then it experiences and interacts with physical consciousness. Experiences and interacts with physical reality through matter, through a brain or nervous system. All of you know this. I mean, all of you have been told this. You experience reality through your brain. Okay. Again, we're staying completely simple, very uncontroversial, and no problem so far. So, however, second half of this premise, but matter, such as brain, does not have televisual picture screens of any sort inside of them. Okay? All right, so right there, if you have a brain cell, it will look something like this. You can have a whole network of them, or a trillion of them if you want, inside of your head. This is different than a thought you might have, such as a thought of your, say, the number 2. All right. So if you look inside someone's consciousness, you see meat, brain cells. You don't see thought. You don't see feeling. You don't see visualization. So I can close my eyes right now and imagine a blue dragon, and you can do surgery on me and look through my brain and try to find the picture screen, the mind screen image of that blue dragon. You won't find it. All you'll find is meat, brain cells, in other words. Okay? So the idea that consciousness involves a physical process requires there to be an explanation at some point. It doesn't exist yet. At some point in the future, somebody's going to have to explain how meat can have picture screens in it. Digital, televisual, picture screen imagery. Okay? So, let's go to data point 3, which follows directly from 2. Picture consciousness is not located within, does not come from organic matter. So picture consciousness cannot operate by way of brain or any matter to interact with and or perceive physical reality. Okay? So you can start to see simulation theory already emerging here. and here's another data point which follows directly from number 3. A human mind cannot be located within the physical reality that it believes it is located in. Okay? That the mind screen tells you that you're located in a specific physical reality, such as this room. Okay, but the premises, the data points we're discussing here, would indicate that that can't be the case. Okay? So let's go to data point 5. Human experience of physical reality is not the reality the human mind exists amid. So you don't exist actually in this room now. Your mind screen tells you you do, but you actually don't, okay, according to where this argument is taken. Data point 6, human mind screen experience of physical reality does not represent mind-independent physical objects. These are very similar points. I'm just laying it out very incrementally, step by step. Then we get to a conclusion. Sorry, there'll be typos. Since this is old information, like I said, over the last few months, there may be typos and so forth, since I was unprepared to use this old stuff. So, sorry for the no cap there. Non-representational mental, so we conclude here, this means therefore, or conclusion, we conclude that non-representational mental experience of physical reality is a fabricated model. Okay, and a synonym for model is simulation. All right? So this argument here should be close to a drop-dead indicator that your consciousness, your mind, is simulated. It did not evolve. The evolution is part of the simulated reality, part of what the mind screen tells you exists. Just as the mind screen tells you that you exist in a room right now, it'll also tell you that it'll give you various portrayals of where you come from through history. Some will believe religious portrayal, some will believe evolutionary portrayal. The mind screen argument does not involve any of those. It tells you that you are a simulated being. Something, we'll get to into this more later, but something or someone or somehow conscious content is implanted into your mind. Okay? So what this, and we're going to discuss an objection to this data point here in just a minute. But what this involves is what's called mind dislocation. And again, these are all my old terms, so hopefully these will go okay. So mind dislocation involves, this is a term I just made up. And here's my here's the definition of it. If you believe you are in a physical reality which you are in fact not in, you are experiencing mind dislocation. All of you have seen The Matrix or Videodrome. Various movies portray this. This is an old problem that goes way back to René Descartes, one of the co-inventors of calculus, one of the great philosophers from the Age of Reason. And he came up with the idea, what if an evil genius or evil demon or something is implanting information into your consciousness to get you to believe that you exist in this reality when in fact you're sitting somewhere else. In the movie The Matrix, it's portrayed as if you're sitting in some bathtub somewhere with electrodes implanted into your nervous system to stimulate experiencing to get you to believe that you're somewhere that you're not. Okay? That's what I just termed. No, I don't know. Nobody's come up with a term for that, I don't think, so I just call it mind dislocation. So in other words, if you believe you are in physical reality than some other reality, then you are in the trance of mind dislocation. Mind dislocation is the opposite of realism. Okay? So, man, my realism definition really improved over the last few weeks. So let's just see what we have here. Well, I can just tell you what realism is. It is the idea. It's the opposite of mind dislocation, where you are a consciousness which takes in information through the surroundings that exist in three-dimensional space around your consciousness, and information is channeled into your conscious apparatuses through what are called sense organs, where your consciousness creates picture imagery of your surroundings. Okay? That is what almost every person on planet Earth believes is going on with their existence. That's called a realist scenario. And I know very few philosophers and scientists who reject realism. They're out there, of course. But so mind dislocation is the opposite. The information, we're going to find out through other arguments coming up here, that it appears to be impossible that information can come into a consciousness in that way. Okay, and you'll be shocked at how simple the evidence for this is. And in fact, there's many scientists who I think are already onto this sort of idea, but they might just be a little bit, they don't want to sound crazy for suggesting such, right? So let's, before we go into some more background stuff, let's discuss an objection, the obvious objection here that somebody can come up with to the mind screen argument for simulation theory that I just went through, is this premise, this data point here, that there are not picture screens in consciousness, in matter, in brain matter, nervous system matter, or whatever you want to say a consciousness is created from or acts through or is, emerges from, whatever material system. Okay, that would be the clear objection, correct? And it's even, you can even bolster that objection by discussing how, when, to my knowledge, I'm not a biologist, obviously, but to my knowledge, when humans have, human information, from what I understand, is channeled into human consciousness, by visual information through the retina, and it's topographically laid out in roughly the same arrangement in the primary visual cortex in the back of your head. Okay, so it almost has a screen-like sound to it, so to speak, or a screen-like setup where you have information through the retina laid out in the same topographical arrangement in the primary visual cortex. Okay, so is that the basis of a screen being formed in one's primary visual cortex? And the answer to that would appear to be a very sharp no. For reasons that I'm going to go into, but we've already stated one reason why. I don't care how much information correlates in your primary visual cortex to what the retina picks up visually in the external environment. You never have the case, it appears, where meat brain cells can have digital picture screens in them. Okay? Now, are we observing this? I mean, it appears we're observing a screen. It appears this is how human, something like this. Okay, here's a guy making eggs. Okay, and here's the external environment. Light information channels into the eyes, and a picture is formed somehow or another through brain apparatuses and conscious mechanics and so forth. And he's viewing the screen. This is a huge mystery. Okay, because it seems like this is exactly what's happening in consciousness, right? But this appears to be impossible, not only for reasons I'm going into here, but this is a well-known paradox which goes back hundreds of years in philosophy called the homunculus paradox. So here you've got a guy with another guy, a copy of himself inside there. This little person called a homunculus, all right? That's what philosophers call it. And so he's in here watching a screen of the outside world. It seems like this is what, I can close my eyes and look at I can imagine a blue dragon in my head, or imagine the room I was just looking at, and it seems like I'm looking at a picture screen of some sort, right? So if we are looking at a picture screen, we have a major contradiction, which I'm about to outline to you, which plays out. But if we're not looking at a mind screen, how can't we be? It seems that it's self-evidently, it's almost an absolute truth, it seems that we witness some kind of mind screen in our consciousness. Whether or not the mind screen represents anything in reality is one issue, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the existence of the mind screen. Whether or not it represents anything real outside of you, who knows if that's true or not. But that it exists appears to be a self-evident truth. So one of the few that philosophers will agree on often. There's very few things that philosophers will call absolute truth, but the existence of your inner mind screen, or your, the mind screen is not just visual. It has sound elements to it, auditory, gustatory, olfactory, so different kinds of elements to it. So, now, the one problem is that all you're doing here in this model here is you're transferring the problem into this guy, right? Now, he's got to somehow have mind screen experience, so you have to have another homunculus inside this guy, and another screen that homunculus is watching. And then the homunculus on this guy has to have a screen that he's watching, and then another homunculus, and it goes on to infinity. Okay, and you never actually have mind screen experience because you always need another step in the infinite homunculuses that are inside this, inside you. This is called the representational model of perception. where human minds create maps of reality inside consciousness which represent an exterior environment, okay? That leads to contradiction, okay? So in other words, the basic way that almost all academics in the world, since John Locke came up with representationalism hundreds of years ago, so the basic way that we all view perception as happening by humans creating maps inside consciousness appears to be a contradiction, okay? And for some reason, this is basically ignored. I think even by philosophers, it's largely ignored for some reason. So, the obvious solution to this is to get rid of it all. Get rid of all these homunculuses and screens and everything, and just have matter, or meat, or brain cells, which is what modern science is promoting anyways. But if that's the case, how do we perceive the color blue, like these seats here or something? It appears that it's enormously difficult to explain that, which we'll go into that a little bit later. I don't know of any explanation that exists to this point for that. So let me go into a better, so we were talking about premise 2 here. Whoa, oops, wrong docs. Sorry, all messed up by all my stuff getting lost here. Here we go. So we're talking about objections to data point 2 here. Now, let's present another, I haven't really defended that objection, have I? Probably not. So the objection is, who says there are no mind screens, digital mind screens that matter? Some of you might want to say there has to be, okay, because that's the only way we can get around all these homunculus problems and so forth. Somehow there has to be a screen that is experiencing. Not experience, where the guy's sitting there back there watching it, guy or girl or whatever. That leads to the homunculus contradictory regress. Okay, you have to have a screen that is itself experiencing in some way, all right? Now, that would get around this premise, which would block us from proceeding to the conclusion that mind screen is simulated. Okay, but there is an amazing, I guarantee you, that everybody who didn't come to this talk is missing out the most shocking information you will ever hear in your whole entire academic career I'm about to deliver to you right now. And it is in this article right here, which 3 of you have seen already. It appears, now this information will cause cognitive dissonance to many of you, and you will find great resistance to this information. But if the information in this article is true, if this is the case, which appears to be, that could be verified quite easily, there is no objection to premise 2 that we just pointed out, which I'll explain. Now, some of you will have great resistance to this. Don't get all upset at me. I'm just giving you, this comes from the journal Science, which is, of course, one of the #1 most prestigious academic journals in the world. Okay? And this comes from the late 80s, this article here, called Is Your Brain Really Necessary? I can just sum it up for you really fast. Okay? There was again, this comes from the journal Science, all right? This doesn't come from me. This doesn't come from some blog. This comes from probably what's regarded as the #1 most prestigious science journal in the world, all right? And if you have problems with this information, don't talk to me, talk to them. I'm just channeling the information from them to you, all right? This article, what I can tell you briefly what it says is there was an honors degree student in mathematics at the University of Sheffield who had an abnormally shaped head, and one of his professors said, hey, why don't you walk over to the medical school and get a brain scan to see if everything's okay upstairs, right? And guess what they found? They found nothing upstairs. This person had virtually no brain. Okay, how does that work? All of you are saying this is impossible, this is ridiculous, this is just some quackery. Fine, that's great, think whatever you want. I'm just quoting what this article says. Now this should kind of make sense. We're all told and sold on the idea that mind screen, your conscious content, is meat. But there's not any evidence for that at this point. When you put somebody under the encephalogram and their brain lights up, all that is just mapping the meat. Nobody's seen conscious contents like feeling and visualization, that blue dragon I was imagining a second ago, thinking of the number 2. None of that is mapped. All that's being mapped is the simple mechanics of synapses and synapse interactions of neurons. So Now, when we look inside our consciousness, I can imagine that blue dragon again, and it sure doesn't look like this brain cell. And in fact, I have a hard time understanding how many brain cells you can accumulate where all of a sudden it turns into a digital picture screen. So the point is, many philosophers are fond of saying, including John Searle, Trenton Merrick, some of the big heavyweights in philosophy these days, are fond of saying, if you look inside at your consciousness, introspect, and then you look at the brain cells, they just don't seem like the same kind of order of stuff. It almost seems as if brain cells aren't the kinds of things that can give rise to conscious contents. How do brain cells give rise to a feeling? How do brain cells give rise to the picture that you can form in your head right now of a blue dragon flying around, or whatever, your cat, or anything? So now this appears incredibly absurd to us because we have all been told, something we have not seen with evidence, that consciousness is brain matter of some system in the brain. But none of you have been given any evidence for that because the evidence for that simply doesn't exist. All right? Now, I know most of you are told that, oh, yes, that does exist, sir, because I know this person, they got smashed in the head with a baseball bat and they got brain damage, and it was a very specific kind of brain damage resulting from damage to this part of the brain. And then there were all these other people that I researched that had the same brain damage and they had the same effects and so forth. So it's got to be the case that you take away part of the brain, take away part of the behavior, there's a direct connection. Brain, behavior, mind houses brain. Brain houses mind, which, if damaged, part of the mind goes away and therefore part of our behavior can go away and so forth. That is the standard argument people give for arguing that consciousness is physical. But it simply is ridiculous and doesn't work. Why? Because the equation I just pointed out, damaged brain, damaged mind, does not always happen that way. We all have read, there's a book called Lopsided Ape. Man, I can't remember, didn't think I'd be talking about that here. I read that book in the 90s. I think it was published in the 90s by an Australian anthropologist. I remember when I read in there's a language center on the side of, I forgot which side it's on, right above your ear, called Broca's area, which handles language. And many times if it gets damaged, somebody gets smashed in with a baseball bat or whatever, they will, Broca's area is damaged, and then those language functions associated with Broca's area go away, okay? But there are a whole host of other cases where Broca's area jumps, quote unquote, to the other side of the head, okay? How does that happen? Is it stored there already, so when it gets damaged here, it activates? Who flips on, does the homunculus flip on the switch? This is a joke. To make the Broca's area turn on all of a sudden? Did it, as it was being damaged, did it run over? I mean, what is going on there? That doesn't make any sense, and it completely would appear to obliterate the idea that there are specific centers for mental activity in parts of the brain, damage them, damage mind, okay? That appears to not always be an equation that is carried out. So that main argument, which attempts to argue that consciousness is physical, fails. There's other examples, several examples of children where you can take out an entire hemisphere of their brain, and sometimes that leads to detrimental problems, okay? Other times, that half the brain remaining makes up for all the rest of the functions, which were believed to be on one side only, then they show up on the other side. So what's going on? Now we have this no brain situation. It's not exactly no brain. It was a millimeter sheath of material covering some of the inner parts of the skull. Okay? I know that all of you are sitting back saying, just kind of putting this out of your mind. That's fine. I don't operate in a way other than as follows. I follow evidence where it leads. I ignore and stay away from biases of any sort. So if there's not evidence for a certain position, such as the idea that brain is a physical system, mind is a physical system in the brain, I simply don't pay attention to that. Unfortunately, it seems that most academics in the world are paying attention to that thesis, which is one without any evidence at all. So now we come across this situation. This isn't the only case. This article explains how there's hundreds of these found. They're called hydrocephalic. And it's theorized that it's from some sort of cerebrospinal fluid overload in the brain. But to my knowledge, that's never been documented for all these cases. It's just assumed that hydrocephalicism is what's responsible for this. The point is where does the hypothalamus go? Where does the limbic system go? what are all those how does this person function? And they're not sitting there drooling in the corner. This person is an honored student in mathematics at the University of Sheffield, or was, once he's still alive. You can go and talk to him and study and so forth. But this should be a completely revolutionary piece of information. And look at the title here that is given to the article. Is your brain really necessary? So anyway, moving on, if it's not, you'll just have to study down here, and you can look up this article. It's on my website. It's all over the internet. And it appears to be just basically ignored by academics who persist in putting forth the thesis that consciousness is physical. When we have this kind of evidence, which is measurable, but there is no measurable evidence for the thesis consciousness is physical. So I go where the evidence goes, and that's why that's why I talk about this, and it also is in line with simulation theory because, look, the only objection I know of that really can attack this mind screen argument is to assert there are mind screens in physical matter somehow. Well, we've got one problem. We got at least one example of a person who doesn't have a brain and would appear to be having a mind screen, okay, because they can point to a color and say blue, which requires mind screen experience to be able to do that denotation. So the objection to this that there are in the future someday it will be discovered mind screens in brain matter or some other kind of matter, or so they can be put into robot minds or something, robot brains. It appears that objection completely fails because of the example from the journal Science that I just pointed out. So, all right, let's go to some other information here. Let me go. Well, actually, maybe we should go over some terms here real quick. Okay, desimulation. This is another term I've made up. Now, okay, we've got one argument for simulation theory. There's about 20 more. We'll probably only get to about 4 or 5 more before we get to the end here, because I'm, of course, taking up way too much time, as usual. Is it really 3:41? I should probably get moving. Because I've got a whole bunch more to do. Desimulation is the idea that a human can actually wake up from the simulation theory. Now, there's actually a religion that studies this called Buddhism. Okay, I happen to be a Buddhist, and obviously a lot of my research, my interest in Buddhism has led me down this road. But you go talk to the average Buddhist who's got some experience with meditational practice, and they'll tell you that physical reality is some sort of a dream. What actually exists is something that is ineffable, beyond language. But if you really get them to try to explain it, they'll start describing it in a way very similar to something that could be considered an energy field of some sort. And then that's the simulation theory. So there's a possibility of desimulation, okay, which it's mysterious that this is our existence, even without simulation theory, that you've got groups of people out here saying that we can have this completely different sort of experience, which contains unfathomable ecstasy. Okay, desimulation is a process that involves spiritual ecstasy. All right, interestingly, here's a Dharmakirti is a pre-classical Indian Buddhist philosopher, 700 AD in India, who developed an incredibly sophisticated, still ahead of its time, system of logic and metaphysics about nirvana. In other words, about desimulated reality, this energy field. And I just made up this term, Dharmakirti in metaphysics, but it's a simulation theory. There's another great philosopher in the West, Plato, and an associate of his, Timaeus, which is discussed, and he has his voice heard in Plato's book called Timaeus, which they're both appear to be simulation theorists as well, and they actually hold. There's all different kinds of simulation theory. Okay, you're all familiar with the Matrix movie, sort of one where your nervous system gets plugged in so it can experience. But that kind of simulation theory should be impossible because of the mind screen argument we just had, right? Because to plug your nervous system in to get it to experience in various ways requires that you have the ability to have your consciousness create mind screens, which, from what we just saw, can't happen. So there must be a different sort of simulational reality that exists, which is as follows. You are a mind, not a nervous system. There's the difference between the Matrix-style simulation theory and Platonic simulation theory. You are a mind which has directly implanted into it mind screen experience in a process that is very little understood to this point. All right, so a couple more terms here. We already talked about mind dislocation. Mental entity, that's simple, just any object in your consciousness, thought, feeling, visualization, or what's called qualia, which is another content of consciousness. Now, here's an important term, mind prime. That's a term we're going to use here in a few minutes. This is the idea that, this is your mind. Mind prime is your mind. Okay, so when you see this symbol here, MP, that means you're talking about your consciousness. Okay, and it contains thoughts, feelings, visualizations, and qualia. Qualia is the feeling that you have of what it's like to be you, your feeling of being who you are. You feel that, this pen doesn't have qualia. You assume that you have qualia, but not this. Okay, so it's a certain feeling that you have of being a living entity that is you. So your qualia supposedly is different than my qualia, and so forth. And then we already talked about mind screen. Non-realism. This is an extremely important term, which usually philosophers talk about anti-realism, but I've been discussing what's called non-realism, because it's a very extreme type of anti-realism. Basically, it's the idea that realism is impossible. This idea that there's an outer world, an outer environment outside your consciousness, which you have these intermediaries between mind and world called sense organs, which can pick up on the information around you. It can be a mapping consciousness. That's impossible, according to realism, which we're going to get into in just a minute. Okay? And so maybe that's what I should... Well, then let's... there's my definition of realism. Then here's simulation theory. Simulation, the mind screen. Rather than realism, creating mind screen experience, mind screen originates from not realism. Okay? Rather than realism. It's implanted into mind prime, into your consciousness, by an intelligence rather than from the environment. And we have a really powerful set of arguments we're going to go over in just a few minutes, which discuss that. Let's first discuss non-realism, which all of my research from 1999 to 2007 was based on studying what's called Buddhist atomism, mereological nihilism, which are versions of non-realism, okay? This idea that realism is impossible. Okay, and my goal, there's a lot of arguments out there for this sort of scenario, but I wanted to come up with the best one I could possibly come up with. And then there's an article that I wrote, well, I'll show it to you later. There's an article I published which has the following argument in it. Okay, let me go through this. Let me take about 3-4 minutes to go through this very carefully and slowly. Your reality, as you know, is composed of basic building blocks. All right, physicists call them elementary particles. Philosophers call them philosophic atoms. Basically, if you tear apart anything, like this, you can get down to smaller and smaller pieces until they become so small you can't see, and you can keep tearing and tearing and tearing. And then there is very strong reason to believe that there's a last division you can get to, and you have a final piece of reality, which is called a basic building block, or what a physicist calls an elementary particle. It doesn't have any parts. It is the absolute bedrock of existence, okay? And it's called, another word for it is philosophic atom. So a philosophic atom is a fundamental, irreducible, uncuttable piece of reality, okay? And this has been discussed in philosophy for thousands of years, all over the world, okay? So here's the deal. Here's the issue. We'll talk about an objection to philosophic atomism in a minute. Do these fundamental building blocks have a magnitude, an extension, a size, or not? If not, then they are all called point particles, which should sound familiar, because that is what the standard model of quantum physics. Quantum physics is the science that studies all the tiny basic building blocks of reality. That is the accepted view in the standard model of quantum physics. The Higgs boson people that had the big discovery, that's the standard model crowd, and they all assert that the fundamental building blocks of reality are point particles. Okay, if that's true, well, then reality can't be exactly as we see as we believe, right? So going back to the issue here, though, do the fundamental building blocks of reality have a size or not? If they do, then they can bunch up and, like Legos would, and accumulate things like chairs and people and whatever, and there's no problem, right? Very commonsensical, all right? However, there is no evidence for that position, as we'll discuss. There appears to be enormous contradiction with that. It seems that that position is impossible, that these fundamental building blocks, basic building blocks, have a magnitude. This would be a part. This is a picture of one. It's called the Democritean atom, after the philosopher Democritus from ancient Greece, who anybody's knowledge is the first person to invent the concept of the philosophic atom, the basic partless building block of reality. Okay, so if they have size, no problem. Okay, you can see how, put them atoms together, they accumulate into solids, liquids and gases and plasmas. Okay, if they don't have size, well then they can never accumulate into anything. Okay, you can't add up something with zero size to another thing with zero size and keep adding up things that have zero size and all of a sudden get to non-zero size. That would be like saying 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0, dot, 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 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals non-zero. Now, there's a whole bunch of philosophers out there, namely, starting with Adolf Grunbaum of the University of Pittsburgh, who are trying to devise ways that you can establish that point-sized particles accumulate into non-point extensions. I personally have published several articles attacking all their research, and their research is completely would appear to be nonsensical, which we can discuss in a minute. Let's get into this, though, here. If it could be shown that a Democritean atom, the basic building block with size, is impossible, then you have a really powerful argument for non-realism. The idea that you cannot be all these color patches and all these extended pieces of matter we're witnessing in our reality, because that's all your reality outside of you is. It's a bunch of sound waves, light waves, and so forth coming into your consciousness, reporting a world filled with extensions that are moving around, and you identify them with tactile experience and by color experience. They're color patches. Okay, so if reality is composed of point particles, then all of that has to be a mind screen simulation. Okay, because obviously, if I'm looking at this piece of the lecture right here, and it is extended, somehow I have to if I'm a realist, I have to assert how it's not just my mind creating the extension. I have to be able to take this thing apart and come to ultimately a fundamental description of the extension, which is not just dependent on my mind. That's exactly what we don't see in science, and it's exactly what we don't see in philosophy. Okay? In fact, reality, science and philosophy are in complete agreement. Reality is composed of point particles. Now, string theory, which all of you are familiar with. Everybody's talking about string theory ad nauseum. And I think, 8 or 9 out of every 10 physicists these days are studying string theory. String theory, its sole impetus was to tackle this problem. How can we have point particles composing a reality of non-point extensions? You have a fundamental philosophical disaster or train wreck right there if you say that all these extended pieces of matter are composed of non-extensions. That's like saying all these things that have positive extension are composed of zero extension, which is a very simple, very easy to grasp philosophical contradiction. So string theory was invented specifically to attack that problem. It was invented specifically to try to come up with a description of basic building blocks of reality as having extension, no parts. Okay? I've written a number of things which directly attack that and show that that's simply impossible. Okay? And here's my favorite one that I've written. I call it the anti-Democritean argument. And I've got a whole bunch of stuff written here, but I should probably just explain it. This is an argument that I published in 2007. I've been working on it ever since, trying to polish it up. Let me just tell you basically what it says. If this is a Democritean atom, in other words, a basic building block which has no parts but a size. Now, this is what this picture is supposed to be a portrayal of that. Obviously, I know that doesn't make any sense, okay? But this has been a huge debate for 2,500 years, ever since the philosopher Zeno in ancient Greek said, if there's an extension, it's going to be divisible into points. And if it's indivisible into points, then, well, how do we account for everything we experience and our minds can experience? Of course, he didn't put it exactly that way, but it's roughly what he did. So let me just tell you what this argument says here. This is what I call the anti-democracy argument again. This a democracy in atom is it can't be changing in any way, because change would appear to involve rearrangement of parts, but this thing doesn't have parts, okay? So the only way you can really describe it, its fundamental feature is its size, okay, represented by this dashed line. Okay, it could be a circle, square, you can paint it in any way you want to. It doesn't really matter. All it has to be is extended with no parts, all right? Now, the problem here is that, what is distance? Distance appears to be the non-coinciding of two things that are not identical. Okay? If these two hands were the same thing, you wouldn't be able to say there's distance. Okay? Because nothing is at a distance from itself. All right? So what distance is when you have distinct things, non-identical things that don't coincide. The mind sees a gap, expanse between them, what we call that distance. That is specifically what a partless extended atom, democracy atom, cannot have. Okay? Why? Well, because you have to, in order to describe distance from here to here, or the whole diameter or whatever, you have to have two non-identical pieces which are non-coinciding. This thing does not have any non-identical pieces. It doesn't have any pieces, and you can't say there's two distinct aspects of it, here to here or here or whatever, because those would because this democracy atom is only one piece. It's what philosophers would call one improper part. So therefore, any description of it has to describe all of it, the one thing. So you can't start talking about a distinct piece here and a distinct piece here in order to divide distance across the democracy atom. So the point is that a democracy atom is something which absolutely requires a description of size or distance in its definition, but it specifically cannot be described in terms of size or distance. So that's a contradiction. So it doesn't exist. Let me explain that in the simplest possible terms. In order to describe its magnitude, like this diameter across this sphere, the Michigan atom, you have to have two non-identical. You don't have to call them pieces. Just call them, I'm just imagining this piece here. I'm just imagining this piece here. It's not even really a piece, but I'm just imagining it as such. So therefore, I'm going to try to, from these two pieces, describe how they don't coincide, and therefore come up with the concept of distance. But we can't even do that because any description, if we describe this little piece here, has to describe the whole thing because there's only one part to it. Any description of it describes the whole. So we have no way to define a democracy atom in terms of distance and size and so forth. So it would appear that it can't exist. Now let me give you another argument. I don't have this in my other notes. Let me just let me see if I can do it really fast. This is a good one. I can probably do this in about 30 seconds. Whoa. Again, I have it all laid out in the notes that got hopefully not zapped by lightning this morning. Imagine if you have three democracy atoms here. D1, D2, D3. Now this is not my own argument. I actually came up with this. I was like, man, this is so easy, so simple, so basic, that somebody else had to have come up with it at some point in the past. And sure enough, in the classic era of Islamic philosophy, it was discovered by two Islamic atomistic philosophers. So now look at here. So remember, any democracy atom, any description describes the whole atom. Look at this right here. Let's describe D2, democracy atom D2. Let's describe it right here. Its interface, let's just say, be as simple as possible, say it touches D1. Okay? Simple. Let's describe what it's doing here. Touches D2. Sorry, D3. Touches D3. Okay? Let's translate that statement into another statement, not touching. Because here it's not touching D1. So not touching D1. Now let's combine these, since D2 any statement describes the whole thing, we can just combine these two statements because they should be consistent in describing the single democracy atom. Oh, look what happens. D2 touches D1 and does not touch D1 simultaneously. That is the definition of a philosophical contradiction. There's all kinds of other arguments for anti-Democratean philosophy as well. This is just another good one. Okay, so this is one of many ways, by all my research from 99 to 2007, was based on coming up with all kinds of different arguments, pieces of evidence, and so forth for what's called non-realism. This is probably some of the best here, showing that the basic building blocks of reality can only be points. Ipso facto, reality cannot be, the realist reality fails. Okay, that's very, very unpopular philosophy these days. If you're a Buddhist or something, you like that. But this is extremely unpopular. We live in an age, scientifically and philosophically, where professional academics and the average person and so forth, they're all realists. And the idea of non-realism is scary to people. I mean, you identify your whole life with the surrounding, all these color patches and in motion all around you, called your environment, through your life, to all of a sudden conceptualize that it doesn't exist is scary to some people. Usually, if you have desimulation experience, however, you realize that there's another option. And it's actually, probably accurate to say it's infinitely more enjoyable than the realist scenario. Buddhists call the realist scenario dukkha. They say when you identify your mind with personality, fear and desire consciousness, which is associated with the belief in a realist world of matter around you, that life involves pain, or what Buddhists call dukkha. All physical existence is suffering. The grass is suffering. You're suffering. Your cat meowing for food is suffering. Your cat sleeping there seemingly peaceful, if you're in desimulated states of awareness, you will have this epistemic realization, somehow that cat has pain. I have pain. The grass has pain. This is a fundamental realization that comes in early Buddhist meditational experiences. Now, simulation theory is not that scary unless the only thing one knows is physical existence. You identify your happiness or sadness with that. Now, there's a whole bunch of other. How much more time do I have?
It's 4 o'clock right now, 4:01.
How much longer should I go?
Well, probably not later than 4:15.
Oh, still got a little time. Okay. Good. Okay, we can really hit some of this then. Now, there's another. I just made this up in my office before this little argument here because losing everything in the lightning storm. Well, at the moment. There's another way to. Actually, I think I'm going to skip this part. I'm going to go right to something more daring and exciting. There are a number of arguments here. These are old versions of them, but they should do the job for us. I call these the thought implantation arguments. Let's just go through one of these. Okay? Remember, in philosophy, we take data points that lead to a conclusion. Okay? So this and this and this all should point directly here and nowhere else. All right? So this is just the first one, which sets the stage for the next one. This argument is called the reductio ad absurdum. That means we start with a position, show it contradicts, so we conclude the opposite. All right? It's a standard philosophical technique used for many, for a long time by philosophers. So let's start off with the first data point, non-realism. Okay, I just gave you some information about that with the anti-Democratean argument. Information to create your mind stream doesn't come from the environment around you. Okay, well, we need another option then. Let's go to data point 2. Since any mental entity in your mind prime, does not come from a realist scenario, representationalist scenario, then any mental entity is caused by another mental entity. In other words, if your mind can't be created by a surrounding environment, well then maybe it's the case that your mind thoughts create other thoughts. Okay? Somehow we have to account for all this thought process, mind stream experience going on. But there's a bit of a problem with that. Look at this. If we have one mental entity, whatever it is, a feeling, a thought, visualization, whatever, created by another one, generated or caused by another one, it's called ME star. Well, ME star, that requires another one, ME double star, and so on to infinity. All right? So we have another, just like the homunculus regress, we have another regress, And this one is what we call a vicious regress. Okay? Like a homunculus regress. It means it involves contradiction. In other words, if a thought, a mental entity, requires another one for its existence, then in this one requires another one, and so on. We never have a point where we finally can complete the task, where a mental entity has its existence, okay? Because we always need the next step. We never get to, in an infinite series, you never get to the last. There is no last step, okay? So this regress simply can never do the job of creating thought, feeling, visualization, and so forth. So any mental entity cannot be created by another mental entity. This is astonishingly simple. Okay. I mean, it's kind of the same. Remember I said over here, somebody else, when I came up with this in the early 2000s, I said somebody else had to have come up with this. I think the same might be the case here, because this is a powerful argument because it's so simple. All right. So what do we have? We have two findings here. Let's go down to the next argument. In my current notes, this is called Simulation Argument 6b, right here. So let's just tally up what we have. We have non-realism, okay, which we've been discussing. We have the conclusion from the last argument. Any mental entity cannot be created by any other mental entity. Now we have another data point added here. No mental entity can create itself, okay, or else it would not have sufficient reason. If you're familiar with philosophy, philosophers are concerned with this thing called sufficient reason, where some types of things just don't seem to be able to cause themselves to exist. Like we were talking about in Intro to Philosophy yesterday, actually I was getting disoriented. I was thinking, what day is it? Because we were talking about Richard Taylor, a famous philosopher, has this passage, yeah, he was talking about you too, where he says, imagine if you're walking through the forest and all of a sudden you approach a glowing, translucent sphere. You wouldn't sit there and say, this is magic. There's no reason for its existence. I don't know what it's doing here, but it just must have popped into existence uncaused. Humans don't think that. What you think is, oh, there must be some explanation. I just don't know what it was. I just don't know what it is. But maybe if I investigated this situation enough, I'd find out why it exists. That's called sufficient reason. In other words, it seems that entities in our human realm are entities that have to have sufficient reason. They don't cause themselves to exist, which would be a scenario where an entity doesn't have sufficient reason. Some people, take the Big Bang Theory, which would appear the Big Bang Theory's days are numbered with some of the discoveries coming out in the Higgs boson. That's going to be a heavily modified theory. But the standard idea of the Big Bang Theory is there's a first moment. If nothing caused it, it would be an entity without sufficient reason. Therefore, it would be a supernatural entity, is the way philosophers would describe it. That's why many academics think there was something before the Big Bang, such as a previous universe crunching down or something. Anyway, so take our three data points. Non-realism, information can't come from the environment. Mind screen information can't come from a realist scenario. Mind screen information cannot create itself. Mind screen information cannot be caused by other mind screen information. We only have one option left, which is exactly the one the philosopher Plato talked about 2,400 years ago. Mind screen information is implanted into mind prime by something that is not your mind. Something outside of your mind creates it. Okay? Now we know that this argument would indicate something, well, there's another argument I don't have right here because of the aforementioned lightning storm. But you can compose another argument which I have in my notes, which goes as follows. My mind did not create itself. Therefore, my mind was created by some entity that is distinct from my mind. Conclusion, therefore, there is something distinct from my mind that created it. Now, that may seem kind of big deal, but there's a problem in philosophy that's existed for a long time called solipsism. And that's the idea that nothing exists outside of your consciousness and or you can't prove anything exists outside of your consciousness. That argument I just gave would appear to end solipsism, would appear to prove that something exists outside of your consciousness. Namely, right here. Something is implanting conscious content into mind front. Okay, so it's not a scenario where it's exactly the same scenario that the ancient Greek philosopher Plato pointed out when he said there's a creator of some sort which is directly implanting what he called forms. We're calling it mind screen content. He's probably being a little more precise with his description of forms into mind prime in order to allow for simulated reality experience. And there's no doubt that Plato and Timaeus were both simulation theorists. Okay, so this would appear to be, again, when we get these premises, we're not using anything fringe, radical, controversial. We're going at the most basic information that exists in philosophy, and we arrive at this right here, that your consciousness is the result of something implanting mental entities into your conscious landscape, into your mind, to compose your mind screen. I've got another argument which isn't here, but it goes something as follows. Mind screen content, from moment to moment, is positioned and arranged in very careful ways. Such activity only can happen by way of intelligence, so therefore there is a programmer that has intelligence or is an intelligence or something that is responsible for this implantation. Okay? Again, really simple. Very simple philosophy. Very elegant inferences there leading to these conclusions. But the conclusions are shocking, and somebody's got to explain to me why nobody's thought of any of this stuff before. To my knowledge, nobody has thought of these arguments. But they seem to, maybe it's because everybody's looking the other way. Everybody's looking at realism and and realism is completely nonsensical. Realism involves, the homunculus regress is a contradiction that realism involves. Another one is called the measure paradox, which ancient philosopher Zeno came up with, which is we've already discussed. It's the idea that if reality is composed of point particles, how can I experience extended matter? Because point particles cannot make up extensions. Another paradox. There are paradoxes all over the place with realist philosophy. To my knowledge, in simulation theory, they all go away. It's well known that representationalist, realist philosophy of perception and descriptions of reality are loaded. This is what philosophers have spent the last 2,500 years discussing. How do we get around these paradoxes? Well, the way is you throw realism and representationalism away and adopt something else, something like simulation theory, or maybe Dharmakirti's Buddhist atomism, which is very similar, developed in the 700s AD. Then you have a coherently described reality. Oh, and guess what? Quantum physics is completely in line with all of this, not with, and I'm not just saying that just to be, everybody wants to align their religion, their philosophy, or whatever with science. No, it's really the case that the anti-Democritean argument is completely in line with the standard model of quantum physics. The standard model of quantum physics is the empirical one, the one which has the observable data, observable through computer screens. Computers pick up what particles are doing, report it on the screen. The other models, string theory, quantum gravity, and so forth, those are the theoretical ones which don't have any evidence whatsoever for them. That would be, so there's a lot more tons and tons and tons more I could discuss, but I'm probably way, way over where I should have been anyways. So
if there are questions you guys want to pose to Jeffrey about this really interesting talk, that's probably a good chance to do it now. I'm going to set up just, some cookies and things outside, and we can also, just kind of continue our discussion outside over cookies, and then we'll just kind of wrap everything up by 4:30, which is the end of our allotted time.
That went pretty good for a lightning strike note, huh?
Yeah. So, first, let's open the floor, and Jeffrey, if you want.
Yeah. Anybody have anything? Yeah.
So, I'm not aligning either way. I'm wondering if we should raise questions about trusting, sort of questioning both the idea of logic and questioning the idea of empirical evidence. And on one hand, you like your theories to be backed by empirical evidence, which is cool. But then on the other hand, we have to question, given simulation theory, should we even bother with such restrictions and these kind of things? How far does the simulation go? I think you understand.
Well, the empirical evidence, that is the simulation. because that empirical evidence is ultimately described in terms of mind screen experience. So, and the empirical evidence is about the physical experience, the experience of physical reality. But physical reality is what simulation theory would report is what's simulated. So science, religion, all this stuff is just part of the simulation theory. Now, you should be able to find examples of, you should be able to look into the simulation carefully enough and see evidence for the simulation. Now, this is another interesting thing. Plato is, again, he had a lot of things that he discussed that are kind of coming about now. One thing he discussed is, actually it was Timaeus, in Plato's book Timaeus, who discussed how, and Plato discusses it elsewhere himself later. They said that there's a creator, which I call a programmer. I don't add any religious implications or anything into my simulation theory. If somebody can if they want, but I have none, except for Buddhism, which is not really religion. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's kind of debatable. But what Plato said is there's some kind of creator of the cosmos, which creates these beings which have forms implanted into them. And what the creator does is uses the most perfect mathematical entity to create the cosmos. He says this, Plato's book Timaeus has Timaeus saying this right near the beginning of the book, and that's being discovered now. They lay it right out there in the Timaeus. It's called the golden ratio, or phi, specific ratio, which we can, but it's being currently, in the last 20 years, being found everywhere in nature, in behavior, facial patterns, structures of bodies, galaxies, hurricanes, quantum particles. The first quantum particle system ever discovered had a perfect golden ratio right into it. So how did Plato, 2,400 years ago, call this? It's completely amazing, shocking. So, point is, with empirical evidence is great if if you're in the simulation and you're saying I'm going with a simulation, which most people on planet Earth do. Your best way of understanding things is with empirical information, with science. And but the simulation theory goes a little bit further than that. It says, well, all that's part of the hallucinatory mind screen, the simulated model, so therefore there's a better understanding of reality which goes a step further. So if you don't go beyond the mind screen, you want to stick with empirical information. If you do go beyond the mind screen, well, then empirical information is part of the dream, like everything else. Makes sense? I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt. There's some cookies and things outside. I don't know if you guys want to go grab them and then continue with the discussion, but I know that students in the atrium tend to kind of eat up whatever food's laid out there.
Yeah,
so,
good idea.
Grab something and then continue, or just kind of continue around cookies.
Yeah, whatever. I'm up for anything.
There's that time of day with lunch and right?
Yeah. Nobody wants cookies?
No? Okay. But if there are more questions, is that really?
Yeah, anybody have any other questions? Yeah.
When do you plan to form the program to collaborate on that a little bit?
I'm trying to come up with arguments as simple as this, which show us what is the nature of this programmer, how is the implantation process happening, what is the nature of the mind. The problem is the mind screen. A lot of this stuff, like the mind screen and its contents, there's no language that describes it. You can say mind prime or mind or something, and everybody knows what you're referring to roughly, but the second you go one step further and try to describe what is it, what are its contents, you can't do it. They're ineffable, they're beyond language. What that means is, if you try to describe what is the color red, define it for me. And don't, if you say frequency, wavelength, or whatever, that you're describing a particle interchange, not... We're talking about the color experience. It is absolutely impossible, as far as anybody knows so far, to define it. And to be honest, I've kind of given up. I've tried to. So I'm going to have to find other ways to elaborate on it. But what should basically be happening is there's a bunch of other stuff to do with right here with occasionalism, which I know some of you have been in my classes and we've talked about. Without giving you all the background, here's what appears to be happening. At every instant, from say now to now, infinite times, believe it or not, there is something is constructing the contents of your consciousness. It appears that it's not the environment, and it's not other thoughts doing it. It's not the mind doing it itself. So therefore, something has the ability to do that, to create a mind, to organize it from moment to moment. I mean, to us, this is all, wow, how could this be? But we could just be simply some kid in, 4,000 years in the future. We could be on his lunch break. He could create a simulation of an entire universe that lasts, in his time, 15 minutes, and our time lasts a trillion years or something. And he calls it, Universe 42A that he's created. And but that could just be how computer systems are then. There's a philosopher at Oxford named Bostrom who basically, he came out with a simulation argument. It basically says, hey, humans are creating simulations now, and man, some are getting more and more realistic. What are things going to look like in 50, 500, 1,000 years in the future? The simulations are going to be amazing. And he comes up with a number of very, very convincing ways to argue that, you know what, it's more probable that all of us are one of those simulated beings now than we are an organic being in a realist scenario. See, what I do is I just get rid of all that, and I say that an organic being is actually impossible. Only a simulated platonic consciousness is possible. And that's actually a good thing, because the simulated reality is the one that involves pain. And if you doubt that, it's very easy to point that out. How many of us want to get up and go to work? We go to work and we look at the time clock all day. Then we get home and the dog, throws up on the carpet. And then we're standing there talking to our friends, and we say, oh, I just got to have a seat. I just want to sit down. Well, why would that be the case? Because simple tasks of life involve pain. By wanting to sit rather than stand involves wanting to alleviate some pain. Okay, so the point is you can run arguments like this for physical existence, Buddhists called dukkha, and it's the one that involves pain. Desimulation is the one that involves the absence, the elimination of pain, which sounds a little weird to the average person, but it's just standard technobabble in Buddhism. That all you do is you take certain steps and pain is eliminated. You can verify that very easily by if you just pinch yourself. Pinch the hell out of yourself as hard as you can. And if you stare right into the pain, feel it as deep as you can, it ceases to hurt. You can punch walls, and I've had students practice that, go to tattoo parlors and get huge tattoos over the whole back, stare directly in the pain at every moment, and it ceases. You can feel it, but it doesn't have the ouch aspect to it anymore. So the point is that a reality without pain is not some, usually when you say that, somebody say, oh, that's just a crazy idea, keep dreaming, stupid philosopher or something. But no, it's easy to verify in about 4 seconds with just inflicting pain on yourself and staring directly into it. Usually the mind somehow kind of looks the other way, and then it hurts. If you put your perception into it as deeply as possible, the pain ceases to go away. If you do that enough, if you look into your feelings, pain and otherwise enough, that is just what's called Soto Zen Buddhist meditation, the Japanese form of meditation. When you see Japanese Buddhists sitting there, meditating for 9 hours or whatever, what they're doing is they're watching their conscious contents. If you stare into your conscious contents enough, this will sound almost so simple it's cliched, but what happens is you realize that conscious contents, the mind screen, was a dream. Just like when you're having a dream at night, you realize you're dreaming, often you'll wake up and say, oh, I was dreaming. The same thing happens with physical reality experience with mind screen, such as this moment. If you stare into your conscious contents enough, say you did it pretty regularly, moment to moment for a day or two, you're going to start having, maybe 3-4 days, you'll start having explosive mystical Buddhist experiences, which will show you firsthand with your direct epistemic awareness that this mind screen set of physical forms, color patches, they don't seem real. There's something else that replaces it, some sort of energy field, which is a whole big bunch of research that I did which I didn't even get to. But there's some kind of energy field that is infinite in size, it's omnipresent, and it involves intelligence and spiritual ecstasy, which is what Buddhists would call nirvana. So anyways, I'm kind of going fast through lots of concepts. Does that make sense? Or? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have anything? Yeah.
So it seems like there's the two ways it could go. It's either this energy thing that's sort of generating these conscious simulations, or you get the kid on his Game Boy that creates
yeah.
That's all it is. Or something. But it seems like that way leads down your regression road where what's, that game, that boy with his Game Boy, he's a simulation. It almost seems like maybe it's just a natural thing that these simulations create simulations eventually if they happen to look like this,
Yeah, the work we're going over here would imply that there is no physical reality. All realities are going to be composed of point particles. So if there is beings that are experiencing physical realities, whether it's in this universe, us, or another star system, or another universe, or another dimension altogether, if beings experience physical reality, which, in other words, if beings experience extended color patches that move around and can be, resisted by tactile interaction, this reasoning we gave here will show those are necessarily always simulations. So, but then you brought up another issue: who's the first simulator?
Right.
So if we're simulated on some kid's Game Boy 4,000 years in the future. And, how does he have a Game Boy? That's a physical thing. Then we have the whole physical reality, non-realist dilemma showing up. That's why to eliminate materialism and physical existence altogether, which again is completely in line with the philosophy of atomism we discussed here, and which is completely in line with the standard model of quantum physics, if that matters to you. To get rid of the physical is where you want to start. That's what Plato does. Plato wrote a lot of his philosophy before Aristotle. Aristotle came along and he brought us our philosophy of materialism, which is still plaguing us all today. That's the philosophy with all the paradoxes. There you have to describe what is motion. I don't have time to go into it now, but motion is only described by contradiction. What is here's another one of the paradoxes of physicality. If there's a thing that's located at a place, this pen, where is the place located? Well, it's at another place. It can't be a placeless place, an unlocated location. That's a contradiction. So you have to have another place, and that's located at a place. You got another infinite. See how the infinite regress goes? Basically, any way you try to describe physical reality, we can see physical reality, but if you try to describe it in any way, you run quickly into these simple contradictions that most of them were known even before Plato, with philosophers like Zeno. So you would appear to have to go to something more like a Platonic or Buddhist model, where you have maybe there are just disembodied minds that exist that implant, that have the ability to generate other minds, implant other minds with information. One of the arguments that we went over involves the idea that consciousness is created by an implanter. Well, that would mean that there's information that can be put into your consciousness in some way. So then you have to try to explain where does the information come from? Is it generated in my mind by the implanter, or is it somehow teleported into my mind? You have to go over all those issues to get to the bottom of it. That's currently what I'm kind of working on right now. I've been working on that for about 2 years, trying to figure out we've got this, and there's a whole pile of other evidence for simulation theory that I didn't have time to go over. But I kind of want to know, what does the simulation reality look like? And that should be, when I get further than that should be pretty exciting, I think. So, yeah.
Is there any role that the observer plays on the actual simulation?
It appears a huge role. There's more quantum physics ties here. Yeah, that's well known that the double slit experiment in quantum physics and the quantum erasure experiments, it's not real popular. If there was a room full of physicists here, a lot of them would say, we don't want to say that. But, those experiments sure do look like what a particle is something that's mind-created, mind-dependent. But it appears that we're simulants. You're a simulant, I'm a simulant. And in the mind screen setting, in other words, in the physical reality, we have the ability to manipulate it. I have this thing called will. Whether it appears it's implanted in me. So if I believe I have a moment of free will, it appears that that's implanted in me, but nevertheless that will, whether it's implanted or of my own self-generation, which, that's very difficult. Nobody can explain how that works. Pure freedom. Freedom appears to be describable by contradiction only. So, I don't know, is that a problem, though? A lot of our logical laws and so forth, all our logical laws and our scientific principles come from the simulation. I usually don't go here, but you wonder, is there a transcendental set of logical and laws and principles of reality? That would have to be deduced through real careful reasoning, but the problem is that the reasoning we're using here is just standard logical principles. So how do we use those to show that there's a transcendental logic? That's what you'd be set up with. So there's a lot involved in that. So, Are we getting to that point?
Yeah, so it's about 4:30. That's the end of our reserved time for this
Okay, good, yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Really interesting. And hopefully, your students can continue this conversation with you.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
class or whatever, and, others can perhaps, contact you via email
Uh-huh.
to continue this conversation some more. So thank you so much for coming to the Humanitas lecture. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
No problem.
For taking the time to prepare this. So, here's Jeffrey.
Thanks.